Welcome to this new episode of WT3 Podcast, the podcast where we tell you what you actually have to do. Today, we're talking to Kelsey McGuire about go-to-market strategies, validating your product, and devising effective go-to-market strategies to maximize your startup's potential. I'm actually really excited for this episode because, Liam and I have been working together for a while. Kelsey and I met working on Into another project, and you're a couple of my most favorite people in the space to talk marketing with and understand what's going on in the market landscape. So I'm very, very excited. I'll give you a bit of an introduction into Kelsey, as you already probably know Liam and myself after episode 1.
Yeah.
So welcome, Kelsey.
Thank you so much.
Hello.
Chief Growth Officer at Shardeum and Web3 Visionary, with a background in marketing at Consensus and Coinfund. Kelsey has a proven track record in growing teams and building communities. At Shardeum, she's leading the charge in expanding the company's reach and refining its strategy. Known for her community-centric approach, Kelsey is driving Shardeum's growth, leveraging its innovative technology and talented team. Welcome to this podcast, where we're going to explore with Kelsey her insights on growth strategies and the future of decentralization in the Web3 ecosystem. I mean, we've had a few conversations. I know last time we met in ECC, we had about 40 minutes penned into the diary, ended up talking for about 2.5 hours.
Yeah.
So, well, I mean, I think the most interesting thing is, like, where did you get started? You've obviously had a stellar career. Like, how did this journey kick off for you?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you both so much for having me on today. It's been an interesting journey. I worked in more traditional marketing and brand related fields and did some consulting before kind of getting a little bit more interested in Web3. And part of that journey was I'm based here in New York City. So in probably 2017, some of my friends who worked in banking started getting nervous about something called blockchain technology. So when the bankers start getting nervous, I start getting a little more intrigued. Learned a little bit about it on a superficial level. And then it was one of those sort of serendipitous moments where I was at an event downtown in Soho for some sort of fashion industry party that I was working with and met someone who worked at Consensus. And she told me a little bit more about the type of work that they were doing over there and Ethereum as well. And I gave myself a crash course and decided to just really dive in and make this my career if I could. And I was super fortunate that everything went well and I was able to kick off my time as a full-time Web3, marketer and community person at Consensus in 2018.
What was it specifically that really made you think I need to transition into Web3? And then also, what sort of challenges did that sort of bring to you with it being such a new sort of nascent space?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think specifically, I thought that there was a lot of unique potential with the technology. Honestly, at this point, some of the narratives that drew me in, I feel like haven't quite come to fruition in the way that I initially expected around this like beautiful, like financial accessibility for the world and almost these like sort of amazing, lofty ideals. I think part of that is still here, but that was definitely the bulk of what sort of drew me in was this sort of financial accessibility narrative, really helping people around the world gain a little bit more of the ability to tap into this global financial system. Um, but it's been an interesting journey seeing how that evolved. And some of the challenges are like, okay, if those were some of the original narratives that were onboarding people into Web3, what are we looking at now in terms of how that can evolve and how to make sure that we're building something that feels like globally relevant without getting pigeonholed into a social impact corner, which unfortunately I've seen projects get stuck in and start to wither.
You talk about the fact that you're based in New York. In terms of marketing, obviously this isn't the episode where we're going to be talking legal, but I think there's an element of it when you're marketing a Web3 product, you've got to be understanding of what you can and can't say, especially in America and especially in states like New York. You've had obviously Coinbase, we've now got Uniswap coming under the purview of the SEC. How much does that sort of affect you when you're looking to market projects?
I think that it has a huge impact, but even though those specific things were not happening when I started in Web3 in 2018, the same ideas around how to market Web3 projects still stand. And those initial ideas that we really stuck with at Consensus and then all the projects I've worked with since are, do not speculate on prices. Do not make these kind of false promises that you can't substantiate. And don't try to overhype things. And I know that those two last ones really connect in together, but I've seen a lot of patterns where it is not necessarily even a bad actor, but they have so much enthusiasm around what they're doing. So they want to talk about it and, oh, this of course is going to go to the moon and we cannot wait to release it. But really, you have to be so mindful and so careful about being able to back up exactly what you're saying and not getting into a sort of starting to drown in this pattern of price speculation when it comes to your marketing. That also really doesn't tend to build those sort of sustainable communities that you're after for long-term success of a Web3 project. So really those core tenets have served us really well over the years, and projects that haven't really kept that in mind, I've seen really face those challenges. That's not to say that projects who are doing everything right, at least from external perspective, will not come under fire from the SEC here in the United States. But I do think that all of these things as an industry are things that we should be extremely mindful of and do our best, and really have a kind of buttoned up legal perspective. I won't get too into the whole regulatory environment, but I really
No, of
do think
course.
that like they can be very healthy guardrails, or at least that's how I see it. When it's working well, regulation are those guardrails along that curvy road so you can go a little faster and feel a little safer. But unfortunately, it doesn't always work that way in practice.
Yeah, and I won't go too spicy here because I think ultimately what you're saying is what a lot of people like Brian Armstrong and Hayden from Uniswap are saying, in that we're just trying to work within the guidelines that we've got, and we need more. And I'm not putting these words in your mouth, but I would sort of say that we do need more. We need more clarity, and we need more clarity not just from a legal perspective, but for people like yourselves that are wanting to market products and say the right things and need to know what they're going to say. Let's move on to what you were talking about just there in terms of community. You were talking about building communities, and that's something that you're extremely good at. Can you tell us a little bit about what sort of strategies you're employing at Shardeum, and how you're seeing the best ways to kind of engage growth in communities in Web3?
Absolutely. So at Shardeum, we're really fortunate to have an incredible team on the ground, especially in India. So one of the core pieces here is our Proof of Community series. So I never discount the impact of in-person meetups. And I think sometimes folks, especially outside of the industry who are just getting started, really picture all of us just behind our computers all the time with limited interest potentially in interacting with others. I know it's a little bit of a stereotype, but that's what really, when you think about a bunch of tech workers or developers or builders, there's that image. Maybe it's a darkened room, everyone's just typing away. And really, if you want to build those communities, of course, there's a strong online aspect to it, but these relationships are really formed and solidified in person. So I'd say that the first thing, especially at Shardeum, proof of community, thinking through a meetup series, being strategic about it, understanding really what these different regional audiences want and need, and really always seeking to add value when it comes to that. And by that, I mean, you're not trapping people in a room, feeding them snacks, and then pitching yourself to them over and over again. You're really trying to figure out what they want to know and how to sort of onboard them to the greater Web3 ecosystem. I feel like that sort of approach really benefits Web3 overall. And really that does come back to you. And we've seen that. Second is establishing like a very strong online channel that is managed. So we really focus on Discord, and we have some very talented folks at Shardeum that manage that on a daily basis. And we have over 560,000 people on there engaging. I think a big challenge there that the founders really should keep in mind is you have to lay out the intention of your online community and really think through it carefully ahead of time, because or else you could easily convert that into a help desk. And there's an element too, of course, of wanting to answer questions. But really, when we're looking at Web3 projects and most startups overall in other industries, we have finite resources. So you probably aren't going to be able to staff 50 people just to make sure every single question's answered. So it's really laying out a clear strategy and clear expectations to the community around understanding what provides value to them and how you're answering enough questions that people feel like they can move forward. And that can take the form of, batching different questions, making sure you're maintaining a great FAQ so that the questions that are coming up again can be just answered proactively and kind of taking it from there. So those are our key sort of community oriented moments. Of course, I think social channels, you can't discount Twitter, X, as well as video formats like YouTube. I mean, we're recording a video right now. Those are super impactful when it comes to sort of adding a little bit more to the community to sort of enrich it. But you do have to have that place where people are coming together, both in person and on some sort of online format or tool that makes sense for the people that you're working with.
You talked before about just in general Web3 marketing and some of the mistakes that people make. What are some of the mistakes, if you can, you see people making well-intentioned around trying to grow communities?
Yes. I think the number one mistake I see is not setting correct expectations. And this is such a big one. And I've worked with projects and we've all fallen prey to it at times. And it's a little bit like what I mentioned earlier, where you're building something and you're so in it and you know that there's going to be a new feature, there's a big release kind of around the corner. So you want to talk about it right away. You want to say, look, this is coming, join us, sign up here, do this, do that. But a lot of times those projects fail to set an accurate timeline. And the amount of momentum that you can lose and trust that is eroded when you don't do that is highly detrimental. And really, it can come from a very good place. It's a great intention. You want to share these exciting things with the community, but you really have to be mindful of consistently building momentum in a way that is realistic with your timelines, because there's only but so much sort of wiggle room that you'll get from your community before they start feeling like they're being deceived, even if that's not your intention at all.
I remember sort of last cycle, it was pretty much a given, probably cycle 4, for projects to be delayed and roadmaps not to hit the targets. Do you think, is that something that's just not acceptable anymore, given the competition across how many blockchains we now have?
I think to a degree it isn't acceptable. I think that with the level of competition, that you have to think about things much more ahead of time. And that by that I mean your roadmap might slip, but it's not something that should be here's our entire roadmap communicated to the community, published externally, and then you're slipping. It should be we're slipping a little internally. That is normal and will happen, but you're not having your big announcement cycles. You're not sharing all of that until you're a little further along, until you're a little bit more locked in with your timeline. There's still some forgiveness there, but I think that setting a aggressively incorrect timeline has too much. I think it's because projects and founders, you want to get ahead a little bit as well and kind of keep up that momentum, but really the negative impact that it has far outweighs, I think, any sort of positive little bumps that you'll get when you're looking at your KPIs.
So you're saying in terms of the messaging, be more granular on the things that you know are locked in and be a bit more kind of looser, give sort of ballpark timeframes in terms of messaging for the bigger ideas.
Exactly. That seems to strike the best possible balance between you want to be transparent and share things with your community, but you're also managing expectations in a way that feels much more productive and appropriate when you're looking at some of these longer roadmaps and timelines, especially.
I mean, that's the thing. Obviously, a lot of projects do have long roadmaps and long timelines. We've got big plans to build. I mean, look at Ethereum with his purge, merge, splurge, gurge, wurge, whatever they all are.
Just goes on and on and on.
Exactly. So we're talking about that and talking about going on and on. I'm going to segue perfectly into the future of Web3 and decentralization. What are your sort of predictions and hopes for the industry? You talk about being involved with Consensus back in 2017, 2018, it not coming around, some of the things not being materialized as you expected. What are some of those things that you really hope will be in the future? And let's say maybe this next cycle, let's start with.
Yeah, so I'm really excited to see that there is much more of a focus on user experience now, because I think
Hmm.
that we were slightly delusional early on when it comes to, oh, this is such a cool technology. Everyone's going to be excited about it. So they won't mind that you have to do, click on 10 to 15 more things. They won't mind that you have to write down a long and maybe intimidating seed phrase. They just like they'll be awed by this and what it can do. But that's really not the case. If we're looking at broader adoption, we really need to focus on user experience. And I see a lot more of that. So for me, that's a huge positive because we've kind of gotten past this part of Web3 development where we do just think that because we think it's great and cool that everyone must think it's great and cool and no one will
Hmm.
mind being inconvenienced, but everyone minds being inconvenienced, and I think it's hard to even get someone to make one more click than they're used to when it comes to engaging with anything. And secondly, kind of in line with that, I see a lot more conversations and focus on, okay, people will be engaging with Web3 and not even know it. And that
Hmm.
is really exciting to me because, again, for a long time, it was okay, everyone needs to know everything about Web3 and be able to do these complex kind of transactions and be able to interact and engage with DeFi and all of these different ways. I think that's awesome if you're into it, but most people are not necessarily going to be. And I think as an industry, we've really matured and evolved and taken the perspective that a lot of people will use the technology, they won't necessarily realize that it's Web3, and that is most certainly not a bad thing. If people are
Hmm.
using it and it's providing like utility, and you can play a game and not necessarily know that it's Web3, or maybe the game that you love uses, NFTs, but you don't even realize that they're NFTs because you're collecting these great badges or
Hmm.
interesting kind of skins or however it looks for these different types of individuals. So that's super encouraging to me just because it's indicative of the overall industry maturing and a shift from just focusing and talking about who we are and what we're doing to understanding and focusing on the audience and the general public and what they actually want and need.
I completely agree. And I think one sort of example that people sort of miss, I always tend to use like the JavaScript example, but I think an easy one is just you can have someone have an Android tablet that has a Google app, search for something and be on the internet. And then on the other side, you've got people that set up their own Linux instances with their own custom browsers and plugins, and they're also on the internet. It's two completely different ways of being online. One potentially quite technical, very customized, the other just dead straightforward. They don't even know that they're using a web browser. There are people that don't know what a web browser is that can use the internet. Yet at the moment, you kind of have to know what a Web3 wallet is to use Web3.
Yeah.
I think that's what you're kind of getting at, I guess, is it?
Yeah, exactly. Like there's a lot of ways to, I think, get value and utility out of a new technology. And just because you're doing a longer roundabout way doesn't make your way of accessing it more valid.
Mm-hmm. And it's also, I think there's like progressive onboarding, I think is a thing, going like step by step. I also write for Forbes and their Web3 community. They use, what's the wallet called? Magic.link, which I've not used before. And that's a really straightforward, you just create a Web3 wallet with your email and you've got a Web3 wallet. You can't do much with it other than access the website and get their NFTs and whatnot, but you're in and you're using it and it's dead easy and it's one click. So
Yeah,
is that
exactly.
something that in terms of messaging, how important is it to you to like, I guess what I actually want to ask is from the team, from the marketing perspective, how much do you have to fight back necessarily some of that technological sort of aspects of the saying, no, we need to talk about all this technology. And you may be saying, well, no, let's talk about functionality. Is there some of that friction?
I think that there is often that friction, especially when it's a product that is more sort of consumer focused, where
Mm,
you naturally really do need to orient completely towards a broader audience. And it is just because I think that a lot of it does come from enthusiasm around what special things are being built and done.
mhm,
But
Mm.
it really is, it can be quite a bit of back and forth at times. And I've seen it over the years where everyone wants to just kind of go on about what they are doing and not really focus on what it's doing for anyone. It's kind of like
Yeah.
I really remind people too, it's kind of
So
like if you're
true.
at a party, yeah, and you go up to someone and they're just like, "Well, I went to this university and now I'm working here and I have this car and I'm doing this. You don't want to talk to them. You don't really want to hang out with them anymore. But if they're trying to figure out who you are and connect with you on that level and be like, oh, actually, I have this friend that might be great for you to meet, it feels very different. And to me, that sort of illustrates the different types of marketing and communication styles. And you don't really, maybe you'll be initially curious about the person who's ranting on about, their cars and nice house and their school, but probably aren't going to really want to spend much time with them long term. I think it's important to keep that in mind when you're working on any sort of marketing or communication strategy.
Brilliant. Well, you finish off this section. Could you talk about any sort of specific challenges or turning points in your career that really helped you get a deeper understanding of the leadership or innovation in the Web3 space?
Absolutely. I feel like there were some interesting turning points in the past through, consensus, Cello, as Coinfund in here, and some of the patterns were really just seeing what very much doesn't work. So I think a huge turning point was probably 2018, 2019, and seeing a number of projects promising a lot and then not delivering.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a huge turning point because, of course, like as marketing and comms people, we know and understand that how you talk about things and when you talk about it is really important. But it really showed to me that is not an innate understanding that everyone has. And if they do, that is something that can be easily overshadowed by enthusiasm or at times greed, trying to capitalize on specific market conditions. And that really just sort of solidified my kind of almost like thesis around doing all of this work, which is to just try as much as you can to be clear and value driven in your communications and marketing and not be a hype machine. And I've seen a lot of those hype focused projects get spectacular bumps, but then sort of just come back down because that's really not where sustainable community building happens in my mind.
Finally, I would just, this isn't on our kind of our list, but I'd just like, for founders looking to start a community from scratch, what would you say is the best place to start with? Well, exactly with building a community if you're literally starting from zero. Because a lot of founders are going to be, they may have some great tech, they may have contacts, but in terms of an online community, what if you've got zero? What's the one place to start?
Absolutely. I think the number one place to start is putting together a quick plan. I know that's not a specific channel, but by a plan, I mean really just writing down. I like to keep things super simple. Founders and people on these teams don't have a lot of time. It can be really overwhelming, but figuring out who do you need to be in your community? Why do you need those folks in your community? What does a healthy community look like to you?
Mm-hmm.
Defining those different factors, write it down, and also understanding that your or someone on your team has to be, your presence is required.
Mhm.
Basically, whether you're starting a community on Discord, whether you're starting a community on Telegram, which I think is a really fun channel to engage with outside of Twitter, if you want to kind of have some quick announcements and back and forth. You need to be there or someone on your team needs to be there. Because without a face behind this or some sort of identity, I know sometimes folks use like NFTs or other avatars that they want to hide their name. That's okay, but someone has to be there because people want to interact and be in a community with other individuals, not with just a brand. So kind of to sum that up, clearly define your community and really what you need from it. Grab a channel, stick to it, whether it is you're going to focus in on Twitter, Discord, Telegram, building community there. And then really take time to assess the results. Is this going the way that you hoped and that you had defined? Where can you pivot and sort of evolve it from there? And just don't be afraid to reach out to those contacts if you have them. And if you don't, start hitting the pavement and getting out to some of these different events because people are joiners and they do, there's a lot of enthusiasm in the space. So don't feel like you have to hold yourself back from getting out there and making those real life connections that can translate to exponential community growth online.
Fantastic.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. Just while we were talking about community, I wanted to get your thoughts on that because I know it's a big topic, especially going into or in the middle of what is now a very early bull market, pre-halving.
Yeah.
So Charlie, let's move over to you. We're going to move on to specifically advice for startup founders in our proper format. So we've got 10 tips for startup founders. Charlie, if you'd like to take us away.
Of course. Okay, so these are the community-sourced burning questions that people really want answers to. So first one, what key market trends should we consider when we're developing our go-to-market strategy? Like, you've seen God knows how many businesses through Coinfund. When you see a go-to-market strategy, how do you know whether one's good or not?
Yeah, absolutely. Something that I really look for and kind of look at is your strategy oriented towards clearly defined audience segments? Like, do you know who you're even trying to reach?
Mm,
I think that that's a really, really important piece when you're looking at someone's sort of strategy outline. And I think that that's often sort of left off because, again, it's that mindset of being so enthusiastic about what you're doing that you just want to share it. And I think that's
right.
awesome, but you got to harness that enthusiasm and sometimes put it towards defining your audience and understanding their wants and needs so you can tailor your strategy accordingly. And I think when it comes to looking at just broader trends in the Web3 space, it's just understanding really which channels are active at that time and how the market conditions could be impacting those specific channels as you pull together the strategy because the market does impact them. We want to, especially from the beginning, I'm focused on, what people are building, what we're doing, and all of those exciting kind of more of the tech side of things than price speculation. But
Mhm.
those speculative groups and communities will impact the types of channels that are most engaging and vibrant during certain periods of time.
Mm-hmm.
And it's understanding either how to harness that or how to select channels that to you feel like they will be a little more sustainable. And I think lastly, also when we kind of come to that a little bit is making sure that you're not just completely putting all of your eggs in one basket when it comes to go to market strategy. Like, don't lean too heavily on one specific, even when it comes to a community channel, because if that, for whatever reason, goes away, I mean, we saw lots of, I feel like, turbulence and ups and downs with Twitter and X. Make sure
Mm-hmm.
that there's other places for those folks to flee to and engage that are already
Yeah.
set before something like that happens.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, when you see one of these plans, what what does a good one look like? What kind of documentation do they need to have when you're looking through someone's go-to-market plan? What are the bare bones? What are the basics?
Absolutely. And, part of what I really focused on when I was doing this at Coinfund too is I think it's important for founders and teams to understand like you can spend weeks and weeks and weeks and months and months on one of these plans. But is that the right thing to do? Not necessarily. We work in such a fast paced industry that I think it is important, like you said, Charlie, focus in on sort of the bare boned aspects. And really, what I look for is kind of a document that combines a lot of different things. So I look for, do you have your audience segments clearly defined and the specific value that you're providing to each of them? Okay. Is your overall go-to-market strategy a phase-by-phase approach, which I think is the most sort of digestible, especially for teams that are trying to do things on their own. They might not have like a CMO, CGO, or any of us like kind of
Mm-hmm.
marketing people on the team. And by that, I mean, it's kind of understanding what does it mean for the general audience segments that you're targeting to become aware and what type of content and pieces do we need to be creating at that level? Okay, so maybe general awareness is broader thought leadership on here's our thoughts on, you know, Bitcoin and what's happening next, or here's whatever is related to your project, but it doesn't have to be it's about your project, if that makes
Mm,
sense. Or, hey, like, here's why current, L2 scaling solutions are not addressing XYZ. Like, get some ideas out there that aren't just pitches of your project. And the next phase, when I look at these go to markets, is how are you kind of engaging on a slightly deeper level? This is when you can weave in a little bit more about your project, what you're doing, without asking them to take action specifically when it comes to engaging with your project. So, if you're thinking about scalability, how do you take it a little bit deeper and introduce that, you're providing maybe a novel solution there, or that you are having some sort of like unique community perspective on what this looks like. And sort of the third piece of the go-to-market plan I look for is like, this is when people deeply engage. It would be more of that educational content woven into the strategy where it's like, here's your how-to guide to get started with us, because you have them and you've taken people on this unique journey. And that is a really bare bones sort of example with a content heavy plan. But the reason I like those types of content pieces that focus on first sort of broader thought leadership evolving into how to's, at no point are you just pitching yourself. You're always seeking to provide value in some way. And when people get to the how to type of phase, they're with you and actually want to be educated and understand how to do it. You're not hitting them over the head with that way up here when people are just hearing about you. Another piece of the go-to-market, depending on the project and really where it's based, can be a regional breakdown. I sometimes do include that and ask that founders really loop that into their overall planning process, because with those that all important audience segments that we were talking about, sometimes their needs and wants and the problems you're solving for them are different, even if you say you have very highly technical devs as one of your segments. But your highly technical devs based in New York City have different wants and needs potentially than your highly technical devs that are based in India. So, really understanding how you position yourself and draw them through this sort of journey with you as part of the go-to-market strategy is very important. And again, it sounds, I think, a little overwhelming at first, but when you break it down into these simple phases with these simple buckets where you first establish your understanding of the audience and why you're doing anything for them and what problems you're solving, then outline a clear and simple journey, weave in some regions if you need to or want to, if that's relevant for your project, you have a pretty good starting point for what you need to do and what you're really testing against. So that's another really, I think, important part. Not, you have to have some initial data to test if your strategy is working, but I think designing everything with testing and iteration in mind is essential.
That was a very complete answer.
Oh, thanks.
It was just like,
I tried. Yeah.
I thought like 3 or 4 questions over the course of that. I mean, one of the pieces that I have to sort of put in is and something that basically quote Liam on, you've got to deliver value first. So it's got to be that Gary Vaynerchuk book that you keep bringing up, chap, which is jab, 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 right hook. Like, you can't just go to market and just say, buy my stuff. You've actually got to start a conversation, bring the potential prospect on a journey, or bring your audience, your potential audience member on a journey that's like, okay, I'm going to really read your piece, understand what it is that you guys are about, and then do like understand the need or the problem or the wider sort of reading around the issue before you're like, okay, buy my stuff. Like there is that's what they say, which is like provide value, and then right hook with the ask. Have I got that right, Liam?
Yeah, no, exactly. From my point of view, yeah. I love something whether Kelsey agrees.
Do you agree, Kelsey?
Yeah, I think that value-oriented approach is key. You want to be offering something as often and as much as possible in my mind. And I think sometimes it can seem like that something has to be some sort of prize or financial incentive, but that something is valuable content, it's education, it's camaraderie in a community. There's a lot of forms that can take, and you should just be endlessly oriented towards that over specific asks.
All right, so we're conscious of time. So we're going to move on to the second question. We could talk about this for about 40 minutes. So this is something Liam and I have talked about ad nauseum, which is product validation. And we're always saying, validate your product before you start building. Make sure that there's a market for it. Make sure that people actually want it before you fully commit into building an entire product. I mean, what methods? Firstly, do you agree with that?
Yes. I think that it's important to understand, why you're doing something, and if there's any actual need for it or need for it, within the relatively near future, because with how quickly Web3 and the overall ecosystem evolves, you need to be able to do this very quickly. So I've seen different ways of approaching this, and some are much more in depth than others. But I think that if you're potentially, slightly overwhelmed potential founder or team, really engaging with other communities and getting people to weigh in. Maybe you don't have a full, strong Web3 network yet, but getting yourself to some of those community events, getting yourself into some of those communities, maybe on Discord or Telegram, and testing out some of your thoughts and ideas, and sort of seeing what resonates, because those are very specific, sort of targeted audiences to bounce ideas off of. And that
Yeah.
can be a great way to at least get some initial data around, is your idea interesting? Obviously, you don't have to go into the full exactly how you would do it and give all of your your project
Hmm.
away, but
Yeah.
I think
Not the
that you
full
should
open
be.
kimono, just,
Yeah, exactly. You don't have to share. You're like, here's a full outline of my
yeah.
plan. Here's my go to market potentially, like all of that. But it's just, don't be afraid to ask and have those conversations. And even if the reception isn't what you thought, this gives you a lot of data to either pursue other communities and testing and asking some of these questions, or pivot your idea ever so slightly. I think I was on a panel maybe last week at one of the events, and an investor was saying that, a lot of these projects, when they're at this phase, and having some of these conversations, there'll be a lot of no's and pushback, and they'll tweak one tiny detail around their thinking or what they want to accomplish. And suddenly they have something and kind of
Mm.
can move into the next phase. So I think it's important to keep that in mind. And there's a degree of flexibility that I do think you should have as part of this phase, to just understand what could be resonating and what might not be. And that there's maybe something that you just haven't thought of that's the tiniest thing that can take you to the next level.
I think we're definitely seeing that at the moment with this cycle. I think around Bitcoin, deep in AI, real world assets. I think these are all things that we're seeing people pivot more into. I know it's slightly off topic, but Theta Network, I learned the other day, is now an AI infrastructure company. Like, they were purely video streaming, and now they're doing AI compute. Like you say, it's all the same infrastructure, but they're just going, oh, but we could do this for AI as well as video. And all of a sudden, it sounds interesting to people again.
Mm.
Exactly. I think that you raise a really important point. It's, part of this product validation phase, but just also in general, understanding what the current market's buzzwords are.
Mhm.
And really digging into if you think they have longevity or not. Like AI, I personally think does, but making sure that you're really actually integrating that idea or concept into what you're doing on a product level, instead of just sticking it on as an
Mhm.
afterthought, is really important. Because I remember it was at Coinfund, but just seeing projects, something trends, and all of a sudden everyone is whatever they were doing before and AI. You're like, wait, is that actually AI? Or how did you suddenly how are you able to put this together like basically overnight?
Yeah.
But a lot of projects are, they had that opportunity, and it was already almost a holistic piece of what they were doing.
I get it all the time, like press releases being sent out. As a journalist,
Yeah.
I get like, so with AI being all the rage right now, and Nick Clegg at Meta saying such and such, here's my decks. It's like, right,
Like,
I was
what?
interested. Well, don't forget me interested, but this has got nothing to do with the first two paragraphs.
Exactly. And what you don't want to do is kind of try to trick people,
Oh,
don't just kind of like bait and switch when it
Yeah.
comes to these buzzwords, because, you don't want to frustrate the journalists. You don't want to frustrate the community. And you really want to just try to build a strong foundation that feels authentic and trustworthy, because not having trust in this industry
mhm.
is not going to work out for you. It's something you need to be thinking of through every phase, in my mind. And, bait and switch is not a great tactic for that, building that.
And especially as technology develops, because So people that are looking to market the products, obviously a lot of them are trying to market to people like myself who are writing articles. And I now have technology that filters every email that ever comes through before it hits my inbox. I get to decide whether to accept or block that sender forever. So when a PR, and I've got to the point now where if someone sends me one of those emails, I just hit block and that's it. They never hit my inbox again.
Wow, I think that's an important point because these types of things have lasting consequences. And for any founders that are not or teams that are not as familiar with the value of, you know, journalists and making sure that they are interested in hearing from you, that value is immense, especially when it comes to building that sort of trust that I mentioned. But they're not going to write about things, not to speak for you, but they're not going to write about things that are just fluff or have tacked on buzzwords. They're looking for something real and engaging for their audiences that they're looking after as well. So don't burn those bridges, and really be mindful of that starting early on, because a lot of your marketing and what you're doing should be aimed towards these journalists as well.
And if anyone's thinking that the way around it is, which some of them are definitely starting to do, which is to create new PR people every day. I've got one PR company that sends emails from a new person at the company every day, pretty much. And I
Oh
got
my
to the point where it's
goodness.
like, well, I have two options. I can block the email or I can block the domain. I
Yeah.
never block the domain because I'm like, I'm not going to let one PR person ruin it for the entire company. But there's one company at the moment that's on my list for if they send another one, the whole PR company's been blocked. So, like, I think that whole kind of used to like grey hat SEO and grey hat marketing that used to be a big thing, kind of like 15 years ago on the internet. I think those sort of technologies now, like, I completely agree. We value transparency and honesty, and sort of you have to genuinely be interested and find a way to do it. Otherwise, you'll get found out.
Exactly. That's wild with the new PR people every day. I hadn't heard about that.
Yeah, I mean, unless they're just growing rapidly, but it's like, because I've blocked
really growing quick.
several people
Yeah.
from this company, and then I keep getting emails from the company. So it's like, well, these are all new people then, apparently.
Oh my goodness. Wow, that's something else. So yeah, everyone do not do that.
Yeah. No bots. All right, circling back, product market fit. Again, huge question. How do we best identify and test for product market fit in Web3 industry?
Yeah.
We can seek validation by going to our community. We can definitely get out there and don't open the full kimono, but say, look, this is what I'm intending on doing. But what would you consider to be a good test? Like it's, I think the old adage was no one related to or in your friend set 10 people that said I would buy this. I think that's from the old Web 2 standard, was that you potentially already collected money for it. Is it similar in Web 3? I know we're building a lot and then living on funding, but how do you see that test product market fit being?
Yeah, I think an important test is something that you can sort of sit down and initially do yourself, especially after having some of those conversations we mentioned with community and anyone that really you can have that type of chat with, is breaking down how you're actually solving a problem.
Mm,
So I see things that are being built that are cool, but cool will only take you but so far if it's not actually solving anything. And this is another opportunity for you, even as part of your go to market document, to break down specifically as part of that audience related exercise. How are you solving a problem for each of those specific audience segments with what you're doing? And kind of, I think we'll get into a little bit more of kind of the competitor analysis down the line, but are other folks already doing this? Because I've also
mm,
seen that in the past too, where there was this great idea and it was, it's truly a great idea, but there's already a project that's been working on it for years. And that doesn't mean that you can't innovate, but you do need to understand what it means to have your main competition be a project that's been established for 3, 5 years already and has a robust community. You have to make sure that you're really approaching this in a unique way, or that you're leaning on a lot of other sort of value oriented marketing and comm channels to sort of make up for that massive gap. So I encourage people to really kind of dig into that quite a bit more. I think that people can also sort of parse out those, and this applies later in the process as well. But the SWOT analysis. As you can see, I'm a big fan of some of these like very simple ways of breaking down these at times overwhelming and complex concepts, just because I've worked with so many teams where maybe it's one person, maybe it's two people. Like, how much are you going to be able to really pour into this, and how much do you really understand how to approach things from an audience perspective? So, if you run something like that, I just encourage folks to use a high degree of kind of personal integrity and honesty. Don't deceive yourself. Like, if you think something is cool and people would like it, really challenge yourself to break that down in sort of this product market fit phase and really understand, like, and be able to articulate what specifically it is doing for each of these groups. And if you're unable to do that, I really think it's time to give things a little more thought. I'm not saying that a need won't arise down the line, but that should also be something that you can clearly articulate. And really sort of start reassessing if it's just because it seems sparkly and cool, but you can't articulate anything else about what value it will be providing down the line. Because I guarantee if you need investors, they are going to be asking, why this needs to exist and really what their money is going towards. So best think about it early on.
With respect to being right at the beginning of your journey, to build on what you've just said, are there any, I mean, I don't know if there's an industry standard, but are there any like key KPIs? Like, I know this many people like the idea, therefore I should pursue it. Is there an inflection point in thinking or the way in which you approach the market that you recommend our viewers?
Yeah, I think it's kind of important to understand to a degree, like what your total addressable market is. Like if you're doing something really niche for realistically your audience segment are like seasoned Web3 builders and developers, and you have a core group potentially already that you think will immediately engage, and then there's groups that you're hoping to convert, understand kind of what that broader number looks like. And you can start breaking that down by, for this instance, there's information, and the number, of course, fluctuates. It's kind of tricky to nail down at times. We're always looking for better data.
Hmm.
But, understanding, okay, X number of Web3 developers exist. So realistically, what percentage do you think actually has this type of problem? And dig into the communities, kind of scan. I feel like online, are there articles? Are there different sort of quotes? Are there tidbits? Are you seeing events and conferences addressing this topic? Because I do think that although I wouldn't commit, since projects vary so much, and maybe some projects would only need to be like, okay, I think 3% of my addressable market would need to engage with this project to make it sort of viable. um, but understanding what that specific number needs to be to actually survive as a project. But secondly, like on a more granular level, if you're like, okay, I got people from three of the top Web3 communities that are filled with people that I think would engage with my product, that can be a solid indicator. I think it's hard, like I said, to have a set number without really diving into what the project is and how it really would be operating in the space. But those are a couple ways of looking at things from a metric standpoint. Another is understanding this requires some tooling at times, which I don't always recommend a founder or team get early on, but there's a lot of ways of measuring sort of share of voice around specific topics across, say, Twitter, X, even kind of general what's happening in Web3 news. And if there's a
Mm.
specific, you know, amount of momentum around this conversation that you need to be a part of for your project, I think that's a really helpful indicator of whether or not your idea is maybe viable, whether the need is there, and whether at least you could kind of capitalize on this initial momentum. So I know it's a few different ways of approaching it, and it can sound a little bit challenging, but really to kind of break it down, talk to people and ask. If you're able to connect with someone who has tools that can measure share of voice around these topics, do. Although I wouldn't suggest allocating a lot of your budget initially towards that, and really understand your total addressable market. And if it's teeny tiny, you need to understand, like, if you need to get every single person in this market to make your project viable, maybe it will not necessarily work out because getting 100% of any segment isn't particularly realistic.
Absolutely. That was an excellent answer. Stick my iron in the fire through my experience. It's usually been so Tam, your total addressable market needs to be over $1 billion. Like generally, VCs don't care if it's not big enough, basically. So it's the TAM, SOM, and SAM. So it's your serviceable addressable market and your serviceable obtainable market, and that's what you're referring to there, which is how much of the market you can address immediately, which is the short term, your SAM. Your SOM is what you're willing to go after, the obtainable, and then your total addressable market. But yeah, it's an excellent answer. Right. With that said, I'm going to accelerate a little bit. We might do a bit of a faster round, mainly because of time. But the next question is audience building. What strategies would you say you found most effective? Obviously, through Shardeum and Coinfund, you've seen communities grow, communities wane. If we're looking at right at the beginning of our journeys, what strategies have you found to be most effective in growing a dedicated community? So maybe not my NFT shilling community. That's we will avoid those. But if you're looking to build sort of a dedicated community and an audience in the Web3 space.
Yeah, and obviously, like we talked previously about when you're starting from zero, but I think what's probably useful is a lot of people have at least their own personal networks that they can bring in. So once you've got some sort of, you've got off the ground, how do you then grow it?
Absolutely. I always start with, again, outline it like we talked about earlier. What are you trying to accomplish? What's working, what's not working, and test and understand what success looks like from a community perspective every single week. So if you need, 30% growth week over week, you need to understand, like, is that happening? Is that not happening? But really kind of in a bigger picture piece, an important one is you have to recognize and foster sort of brand and community affinity. And by that, I mean, is there someone in your community that is really stepping up? Is there someone that's actually trying to answer questions for the other community members? Is there someone that is raising their hand to organize meetups from an organic perspective? Think about designing a program to really recognize those individuals, because the ideal thing and what you can do to sort of accelerate your community growth is you really want those evangelists, and people just on a basic level want to feel appreciated. So show your appreciation and figure out what way is appropriate for your community. I think this also kind of leads us into a conversation around, like, intrinsic and extrinsic motivators, where you don't want to just be like, hey, I'm recognizing you by sending you $10 or, sending you some ETH or doing this or that. You really want to recognize by things that bring people in closer, whether it's like a really awesome curated box of swag that's actually useful and not just like a old t-shirt. Or if it's access to special events that bring the community in, or side dinner. There's a lot of ways to do this, whether it's kind of first access or they are able to weigh in on the next sort of wave of improvements or features. Make people feel special and they'll keep really showing up for you. And I think that that's important to sort of weave in throughout. It has to come from a really sort of authentic standpoint, which is why it's great if it comes from a founder or founding member of the team, because they're in it with you and they're appreciating what you've created. So show your appreciation back. It can't be a one-way street. So that's really important. Another one is, I think sometimes we forget this, especially when we get wrapped up in marketing and you're representing a brand and, people, the end game is you want folks to connect with the brand, the project, what you're doing is be a person. Like, don't talk to people like they're the customer or they're the audience segment. It's a huge pet peeve of mine. And you'll actually see numbers starting to drop off when even I've seen founders or CEOs publish community letters and it says, we found that the customers like this. And it's like, no, you found that you all appreciate this or that the community is thriving as a result of this. Don't act like you're above them or different from them or use overly complex or annoying marketing speak. I mean, that's reserved for internal for the teams where we're breaking down the audience segment. That is not something that is external facing. It just makes it seem like you're kind of a robot marketer or business person and not a real person. And people want to engage with other real people. So
Hmm.
don't sound like that. And I think connecting to that is have a little fun with it. I mean, we're doing really big things in the space. It's really exciting. The industry is maturing, so it can feel serious, especially certain projects. But that doesn't mean that you can't have a little bit of fun. And that can be through like colorful, engaging branding. It can be through your conversational style. It can be through memes. But really, if you're enjoying being there and having fun with it, even when it is a lot of work, other people will too. You
Mm.
don't want to go somewhere like kind of if you think about a party or a room, you want to go to the party where people seem like they're enjoying themselves and the host is enjoying themselves instead of the party where the host is running around clearly wildly stressed out and maybe just a couple people are having a good time. It sets a very different tone. And I think it's easy to forget that because often we're a little bit overworked and maybe a little bit tired at the end of the day, but you're really there for a reason and have a nice time with it. And don't forget, kind of don't lose sight of that piece.
I think when you've got people like Franklin Templeton and Van Eck posting on X with their degen intern accounts and sharing memes, I think when you've got institutions like that having fun, it kind of shows that, yeah, there's room to have some fun and find your audience.
Exactly. It's not that suddenly no one is going to take you serious. It's almost like partially the language of Web3. And if you take all the fun out of it, you're not really left with a whole lot when it comes to the community building or people really wanting to come with you on the journey.
All right. On to question 5, user acquisition. Again, I know I'm putting you on the spot here, Kelsey, but could you share some successful tactics or channels for acquiring new users other than the obvious that our viewers might not have thought of?
Yeah, I think that user acquisition from a holistic perspective is really important. And by that, I mean, show up as a person, like we talked about. You can make some videos, like this is great, having some video content out there, and then make the most of everything that you do. So, and I think you guys
Mm-hmm.
are fantastic at this as well, but it is that you can make video clips. You can then engage in conversations that are in line with the videos you make. So just get the mileage out of what you're doing instead of looking at each thing as a separate initiative.
Mm-hmm.
Everything should connect and flow together. And I think that that's really important. Another thing is something I was thinking about the other day is sticky is sticky. Like have a fun shtick, maybe like a joke or something colorful and interesting that you can be known for. And that can mean something like at Consensus, we had a massive activation in a garden where all of the portfolio companies, which were called Stokes, had these giant, colorful creatures that represented them. And it was this whole interactive experience. And that ended up being really memorable. Or at Shardeum, we're working and got part of a campaign out where we solved the trilemma. I won't get much into that, but security, scalability, decentralization. And we turned each of those into a creature. And we have the fun swag and the stickers. And the idea is you can catch all three almost like they are Pokemon because they solved the trilemma. And that sort of thing has just kind of stuck with people. Even at times, it can kind of feel a little bit silly or cheesy, but it works for the specific audiences and it shows that you can have a little fun and that's really what sticks. And then I think also we can't emphasize enough educate. So
Mm.
educate as much as you can and understand that a lot of times people will have to see something 7, 8 times before they become like a user of your project
Yeah,
or
yeah,
whatever
yeah.
you're doing. So just keep putting things out there that are value oriented. And eventually it will convert, but just have a little bit of patience too. I know we're all so excited to see those numbers bump up, and we were eagerly checking on the number of website visits or followers on Twitter, but it will take time before folks even sort of dip their toes into that part of the journey. So understanding that those initial efforts aren't in vain and really sticking with some ideas and concepts around what you're doing for a set period of time before kind of measuring and assessing whether or not to pivot.
Oh, it's an excellent answer. I think, yeah, it's a page out of Steve Jobs' book, isn't it? Education is the best form of marketing, and I completely agree.
Is sticky?
Yeah, I was
I
like,
feel like it is.
that was the
is that your
idea.
sticky is the sticky?
Yeah, exactly. I was like, that kind of works. And I was like, oh, it's kind of stupid. And I was like, it really actually just is exactly what it is also.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it stuck in my head for sure. And I was like, you know what? If it's a kind of annoying but easy to remember thing that can get stuck
Instiction.
in someone's head, yeah, then you can kind of use a little bit of that thinking when you're considering user acquisition. Because if you're just kind of, I see so much content, the websites, the educational materials, everything looks exactly the same. It reads the same, it feels the same, but just think about what is your little thing that you can be doing across all the channels that it shows that it's you and can kind of be a little more fun or humanize what you're doing to a degree.
Well, that brings us perfectly on to point 6, which is competitive analysis. So how should founders approach a competitive analysis? How do you look at the marketplace and then identify where you're different?
I think this ties into some of those other pieces when we're thinking about go to market and a lot of the steps that we look at there. I would look at folks that are projects that are really trying to solve a similar problem. I would look at projects that are taking a slightly different approach to the same problem. And by that, I mean, there's groups that are going to be trying to do it potentially exactly the way that you're trying to do it. And then there's going to be projects and groups that are trying to do it, but with a little bit of twist. And then I would look at any sort of larger, say in the L1 space, very well established, L1s, if we're looking at like Bitcoin and Ethereum, versus some of these other different types of projects and understanding what's working well for them. This is where some of those tools can also come in handy, depending on how much you want to invest, or if you have someone that has access to something like that, where you can determine a little bit more around share of voice for each of those competitors and projects. And that has been really helpful when I've done these types of assessments in the past. But I do think it really comes down to also whether it's one of those SWOT analyses, like I mentioned, or just clearly defining relative to each of those competitors how you are doing something a little bit different and how you're going to reach the audience that they already have and convert them, and really defining that clearly on paper and to yourself before moving forward too much, because or else I think that you really are going to miss a lot of gaps when it comes to positioning yourself in the best possible way, and you're potentially doing something that already has like a fully saturated kind of done community and audience. That's not to say that trying isn't, is a bad thing, but I do think breaking it down in that way and having that kind of honesty with yourself before moving forward is really, really important. I do think this is another way where you can kind of start digging through and identifying, since a lot of these conversations also happen at these larger Web3 events, going through and understanding who are the projects that are also consistently listed as the speakers, who's spending money to get out there, and really wrapping that into your analysis is really important. Because if you see that, hey, it's a Nears out there, or even like a Solana, whoever you're sort of looking at, making sure that you understand how they're addressing this type of audience and what type of really budget and everything that they're spending to be there is an important part of the overall analysis. So lastly, I would just make sure that this is an important step and just break it down clearly, and don't run an infinite competitive analysis, because I've seen that it's easy to get swept up because there's a lot of overlap, most likely with a lot of different projects. Don't need to include every single possible one that you can think of. And in a perfect world, we could, but realistically, by the time you're done doing all of that, an opportunity might have passed. So I just recommend
Mhm.
doing all of this with a little bit of speed and efficiency in mind and not getting too mired down. Just think of it as like quick, precise, understanding exactly the core pieces that you need to when it comes to this and how these other projects are relating to your audience that you're after, and then assessing from there.
So once you've established that, what are the key parts of a good value proposition? What are the key components? I always like our friend Ross talks about looking at what will be possible when for the user. What's your main sort of key thing you're looking for in a value proposition?
Yeah, I really like that too. The what is possible when approach I think is fantastic. And really just starting with what are you, I mean, honestly, it's kind of that, just phrased slightly differently. Like, what are you doing for the audience and how, without getting too mired in the details. So,
Hmm.
what problem are you solving and quickly how? Like, what's the difference in what you're doing? Is it that you're solving for, a scalability challenge and you're using auto scaling? Or depending on the audience, you have to tweak things a little bit. But I say, just really keep it very, very simple at that level and easy to articulate. Just like, I think you said your friend Ross mentioned, I think you hit the nail on the head there.
So you agree then that it should be less about kind of the specific product or service that you have and what your users will be able to do once they're using your product.
Exactly. It's what you can do with it. Like what, again, kind of the theme of our conversation, what value is it providing? So
Hmm.
just like all of your marketing and content and all of that should be providing value, focus on a product level with the value that it is actually providing to your key audience and can work from there.
Okay, so steaming rolling through the back end of this section. Um, Once you've got that in, sort of laid out, and you know, okay, this is the value that I'm bringing. What are the marketing channels that you think are the most effective in Web3? How should you prioritize them? And are there any that you should just avoid?
Yeah, I think that Discord is really strong.
Hmm.
I'll just sort of go through. So we have those social channels, we're like thinking Discord, you're thinking like Twitter, X. There's lots of new, I feel like channels popping up all the time, but I find that sometimes teams and founders can get stretched a little too thin when you try to saturate every single channel you can think of at the same time.
Hmm.
Another channel that I think is kind of sneakily impactful at times is LinkedIn, depending on your project. And then do not underestimate like YouTube and your blog. So ideally, all of these connect together. So what I would say, and also a personal channel, I never want to forget that for the founder or someone on the team. So you need
Yeah.
that human channel and you need your brand channels.
Yeah. People buy from people. Absolutely.
Exactly. So don't
Yeah.
forget that, as a founder, as a founding team member, whoever you are in the specific project, it is people want to hear from the founder. So it should
Mm.
really be a really fantastic interaction between all of the different core channels. And that means, say you draft a blog post on the current state of decentralization, in Web3. I'm not saying that you should write that specific one. It might be a little dry, but just as an example. Um, and then you have a quick video clip that's a Q&A of you and someone from the community talking about the state of decentralization. And then on X or Twitter, you have little clips of the video, you have some pieces from the blog, it all feeds together. And this would be, say, for a project that's focused to some degree, of course, on decentralization. And then you, as a founder or team member, would post your own thoughts or opinions and then be reposted on, Twitter, X by the main brand account. And that way you're pushing forward a unified perspective on something that is relevant to the industry. So it's really, to me, not even as much the specific channels, although they are important. It's how you can weave them together into something that feels cohesive across a few different ways that people attain and digest information. And by that, I mean blog, long form, YouTube video, and then whatever social channel, which is usually quick bites and repurposed pieces. And then, of course, that human element where it's an actual person on the team posting and commenting that then can be shared on the broader channel. And those sorts of connections are what I've seen the most success from when it comes to those marketing channel usage. Because a lot of times
I'd
we just
add,
focus on one or another.
yeah, I'd add, make sure that person, whoever you choose to be the face of your business, is with your business for the long term.
Yes, that
make
is
sure that they
important.
stay around.
Yeah, it's helpful if that person is the founder because
Yeah.
they will be around usually. But that's a really good point.
Okay, well, the last two sections we've got for this, something that I see as being very important in Web3, which is partnerships and collaborations. I think we see probably more than in any other space I've worked in, the amount of time people are willing to give just to help connect to the projects together for the good of the space. But then just in general, partnering your project officially with another project. That seems to be something you see a lot. Does it work?
I cannot emphasize the importance of partnerships enough. But when you're thinking about how to make the biggest impact out of these partnerships, there's that, collaborative Web3 element that you mentioned where people do want to just connect and introduce each other. Do that. I think it's really important. From a marketing perspective, if you have a partnership, I would say start building out a set of marketing activities when it comes to each new type of partner. And by that, I mean it's understanding the potential type of impact that each partner has and not just announcing it. I think I get really tired of the so and so is partnering with so and so. That's it. Like, well, what does this mean? So I would say making sure that you're always highlighting what that means for your community. And some projects, and I've seen this and design systems in the past, also will organize their partnerships almost into different types of tiers where various marketing activities are allocated to each tier. So, say you have a smaller, more niche project, and you always at least write a post, publish it on Twitter, and it's about what this partnership needs for the community. Say you have a giant partner, if you're working with like a Google or Amazon or someone bigger, that's when, if their legal department permitting, you also have a video, you have the post, you write a PR, an announcement, a blog post, all of those different pieces. So I think wrapping your head around and getting organized around these different types of also like collaborative marketing activities ahead of time is really important. Because one challenge I see time and time again are teams not setting realistic expectations with partners. You'll have the non-marketing person telling this potential partner, yeah, we're going to make a video together. We're going to host events together. We're going to do so many meetups. And then the other person on the team or the marketing person, and these are small teams, these issues still happen, is suddenly like, well, I don't have the resources for that, or we don't have the bandwidth for that. So kind of working across the teams and making sure that you're really buttoned up on what partnership marketing looks like for your organization and making sure that you make the most out of every single interaction. And then secondly, always being proactive about connecting people, even when it doesn't directly benefit your KPIs, just doing the right thing and it helps the overall ecosystem.
Yeah. I've definitely the thing is as well, the dividends for those pay off over time and you don't know when it'll pay off. I've definitely seen that as the case because it's one of my favorite things about moving into journalism pretty much full time is I don't have anything to sell anymore. So I just connect people and I'm more than happy to. And I do it just for the love of the space and it's great. Be like, oh, well, I need to give it. No, I don't care. Like, just go and do good stuff together. I like to introduce good people to good people. So if you're good people out there and you need some contacts, hit us up on the What the Three After the Dark shows where we can chat.
That's awesome. I do. I think that that's probably one of my favorite parts about being in Web3 is when you know just the right person to introduce to someone else and it just does something amazing for them, or they just have a really great coffee. It doesn't matter. It just kind of brings a lot more kind of energy and fun into the space. And I absolutely love it.
Yeah, one of my best kind of meetings like that was it was over just a Google Meet, but I managed to take some time to have a call with someone just to catch up, and because of been recommendation while I was out at the zoo. So I literally had to get my laptop while I was at the zoo with elephants behind me and have this like 30-minute call with someone. And the project's just done their first token generation event, and it's doing really, really well. And I've seen them grow from like literally just that first call to where they're doing now, and it's super exciting. And I've been with them on that journey because of someone's recommendation. It's been super fun.
That's so cool. You and the elephants.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Okay, last one in this section is KPIs. In emerging tech, in Web3, what are the KPIs that really matter? If you had to pick, like, if you only had 3 KPIs for some reason, what would they be?
Yeah, I really like one super solid one, which is if you're focused on, Twitter X, website visits, one metric like that. Okay, we have X number of new followers, we have X number of website visitors for these different regions, and have something locked in like that. And then to sort of balance that with our constantly fluctuating market, I like a market share metric, which is those competitors that you listed out early on, understanding your share of the market relative to each of them, because it sort of hedges that hard number metric. So you're going to see lots of ups and downs potentially, or some stalled out numbers when it comes to Twitter followers or website visitors. But with this hedge metric, and there's some relatively inexpensive tools for this, so I do recommend looking at it, you can understand if your market share is still growing. So maybe your followers are down, but hey, you gained 3% market share relative to your top competitors. So you're actually doing really well. And I think the balance
That's a
of
really great
those
point.
two can be really, really helpful. So if I had to pick 3, it probably would be, I think website is still an interesting channel, one of your social channels, and then your hedge metric as your top 3. And it's worth it. Because also when you're working, even as a small team or even just as a founder, you need to make sure you're having that perspective of what's happening outside of just your project. So that hedge metric really helps you understand, like, okay, here's what's going on for these other types of projects. It's not just me watching, painstaking, like number by number growing on in your community channels and website visits. There's a bigger world out there, and you need to stay connected with it to remain competitive.
And surely I think it's absolutely fantastic answer. And I don't know, I've never thought of it that way, but that ties directly into knowing where you're at for reaching your addressable market as well.
Exactly. It all comes together.
Yeah.
Just to make this a bit more practical and like what you do, is there, so website metrics, Mouseflow, Hotjar, Google Analytics, social media has its own analytics on it. Market share metrics, are there any platforms that you recommend or point people in the direction of?
Yeah, we use SEMrush. It's SEMrush. It's
Mhm.
fine. I feel like there's always these tools where you're like, oh, it's not the perfect tool, but that really has been helpful. So we focus in on that, and that looks at specifically the website traffic, because we've identified that as a channel that we want to drive to, because it's going to be a home for a lot of resources, and that includes, it's not going to be as valuable if it's just like your homepage visits. We have a lot of educational material housed there. So it really is a great measure of how we're doing, driving people to our value, related oriented materials versus what's happening with some of our competitors. We don't want to just be in our little bubble. So I'd say that as a tool works out well. For social, I've liked Sprout in the past just because you can do social listening, which I do think costs a little bit extra. So I don't always recommend it right off the bat, but you can understand what conversations are happening. You can dig into a little bit more of those share of voice metrics, but I like to keep it relatively simple and straightforward and not too expensive to kick things off. So I say SEMrush is a good starting point.
I would like to shill the idea of Web3 social as well, because I'm a big fan of Lens at the moment. You've obviously got Farcaster, you've got Decify, you've got I think SocialFi is a growing area. Like you say, maybe if you're going to pick a channel to start with, it's maybe not going to be the one. It may be, depends where your community are. But the great thing about Web3 social is there's open source, like June Analytics has just implemented Lens metrics directly into it. There's a platform called Bello Insights for Lens as well, because it's all on chain. All this information you can get on chain. So I think as Web3 social, SocialFi, whatever you want to call it, grows, it's going to be really fascinating how easy you're able to tap into these numbers and see what other wallets are interacting with other wallets and all this sort of stuff. So I think that's something that I'd recommend people take a look at. I've earned a few $1,000s this month posting on Web3 social from people collecting content, whereas I've paid X, like, what was it, $20 a month plus how much on ads. So there's a big difference there between Web3 social getting paid to do it and Web2 social having to pay to do it.
I think that's so cool. I would be thrilled if we just were like, hey, let's say goodbye to X, Twitter, all of that nonsense, and convert over to Web3 social. Not that there isn't a place for that, and that I know that there's always a lot of pressure to post and engage because, oh, journalists are there, they're going to see and ask you questions. But we could just kind of collectively transition over to more Web3 social. That would be absolutely amazing. Which one is your absolute favorite if you had to pick one?
Lens, because
okay.
Because the fact that you own your own social graph, and I mean, I use Orb, I use Hey, the XYZ, I use Favor, and I use Kyra, and I use Tape. I use 5 different apps, but they're all Lens, so it's the same social graph. So I use them for different things. So, and because you can collect posts, so yeah, I'm making silly songs about Bitcoin and people are buying them and collecting them with tokens that used to be meme coins, but now have utility because we're buying and selling them. So there's a token called Bonsai that launched on Lens as just a meme coin, but now people are buying and selling posts with it. And now all of a sudden, well, it's a utility token and it's not a meme anymore. And for me, as someone who got into Web3 via Dogecoin in 2014, and it's really amazing because that's the vision I had for Doge. I thought it would be a fun thing that we use online on MySpace at the time or whatever it was to buy and sell things between each other. Never happened. It's kind of happening with this Bonsai token and I love it. It's great fun.
That is so cool. I need to check that out now.
Well, I wrote an op-ed about it on Crypto Slate, so check it out. So, Kelsey, I know branding is something that you know a lot about, and in Web3 we've talked about the way of being able to stand out. Is there anything different about branding in emerging tech over sort of Web2 or sort of TradFi areas? And if not, what are the most important things regardless?
Yeah, I think that a big difference is, for one reason or another, a lot of things are purple. And that's fine. But I do think, though, it's just so purpley. Purple, a lot of purple. But, moving past that, and I'm not trying to say that if you have purple that you're doing something wrong. It's just that Web3 branding, you have a little more room, I think, to get creative. Even if you have a product that is focused more on the institutional side, these different groups are working with something that's a little more exciting and has a unique emerging tech element. So I just encourage teams and founders to really think about what their visual identity, what the visual representation of what they're doing truly is, and enjoy using a little bit of color, enjoy employing like a dynamic experience on the website that still clearly communicates things. And really, I've seen some incredible results from this. When we shifted, I think it was actually with Shardeum not too long ago, from our old branding to our new branding, and didn't even really announce anything because usually it's not necessarily a newsworthy moment. You'll know that better than me. No one, why would they care? There's a different color. But just from the different design and sort of the flow of the website, we saw double the number of visitors on that day, and nothing else was really happening that day. So I would just encourage founders and teams to not undervalue that, because it's still, you're showing up as the whole package. You have your voice, how you're talking about things, how you're educating, who you are at events, and also the colors and really look and feel of your project is very, very important. So don't get lost in the shuffle and make sure it actually means something to you instead of defaulting to the usual little tech figures, or some of the other things that we see across the board when it comes to brands.
In a space where there's a lot of people, a lot of imitators, how difficult is it to switch branding? Because obviously, like, we're in a space where every single Twitter X thread has to end with "this is the end of the thread" because the amount of scams that are going to come after it. If you're moving from a recognized brand to a new thing, is there anything you need to think about how you do that?
Yeah, I would come up with, as everyone probably knows at this point, I'm a big fan of plans and outlines, with goals around that. So I would just come up with an easy plan. It doesn't have to be too complicated around how are you going to sort of let people know that you're going to change some things. You can let them know that you want to become something that better represents the community and who you are and what you're doing. So that way it's just
Hmm.
not, no one's being blindsided. And when it does come
Hmm.
out, you can feel like, hey, we created this to better serve you by XYZ. You can
Hmm.
find the educational materials a little more easily. It's colorful and more vibrant, just like our project and who we are.
Yeah.
You don't have to be that kind of surface level, but it gives the idea of why you've done something, and it all should be really for the community, which is what the branding is all about.
And then
But
people can go. So I was going to say, and then people can go back and check that you've posted
exactly.
for months about it.
Exactly. So they have a point of reference there. And in terms of people kind of being shocked by something, or a lot of times communities don't necessarily handle change well, I think a key part of this, and what we did at Shardeum as well, was take a number of opportunities to poll the community. So I had the overall kind of creative vision and direction for what made sense for the project, but there were key points where we asked the community, do you like this color or that color or this one? And they can weigh in. Or do you like this sort of outline with these types of shapes of logo or that one? And it was surprised, like people just want to feel like they're a part of it. And then that way they are. They
Hmm.
truly are shaping that part of your identity with you. And a lot of the brands that from a starting point I've seen are so neutral and so similar to all these other brands that once you innovate and create something special, I've seen it be very well received, which is exciting.
Really great advice, because it does, and especially from from a journalistic point of view as well. If you don't get that right, it can be really disorientating. I remember when Arve introduced Avara as the new head company of the group, and I was really confused for a good hour or so when I'm looking to whether it needs to be reported on or not, because I thought they'd actually they'd dropped Arve. I thought they were dropping the ghost, and I'm like, no, don't drop the ghost. I love the ghost,
Yeah, you're like
because it kind of
sometimes
came out of
they
nowhere. Like you said, like, I think if they had just, like, yes, you want that shock value to try and get attention, but I think there's a lot to be said in this space of just, creating that plan, teasing things out, so that everyone knows where they stand with it. And the thing, getting people involved. I mean, how many parts of the space are involved with DAOs now? So if it's not a DAO, doesn't mean you still can't have a sort of DAO-like mentality and trying to improve things.
exactly. Like if they had polled the community, maybe they did, I didn't see it, but hey, here's our ghost. Should we keep him or not? I feel like a lot of people would have engaged, and that could have been a
Yeah.
big opportunity to not only tease that there might be changes coming, but show everyone how much they love the little ghost and have kind of Ave and everything top of mind for a little bit. But those are the
Hmm.
types of opportunities I think you can really
Hmm.
where you can involve the community in the creative process and build even more of that kind of excitement and feeling of camaraderie of building something together, which you really are.
And I think that's just really smart. Like, even if you were never planning on getting rid of the ghost, if you can sense check through your plan, people might think we are. If we don't do it right, you play on that.
Yeah. And then you're like, oh, we now have a strong data point. So if one day a founder wakes up and is like, I hate the ghost today, you're like, no, we actually all love it. We actually have data behind that. And the ghost lives or dies,
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, brilliant. Well, let's move on to our final section then. Charlie, do
Desert
you want to take
Island.
away our Desert Island essentials?
Of course, of course. Okay, so Kelsey, this is the component where we're looking for the most practical steps we can give our viewers. If you imagine back at the start of your career, no bags, no reputation, no connections in the space, no black book full of numbers that can help get you out of a tight spot in your entrepreneurial journey, what are the 5 things you would bring to that desert island in terms of the essentials to help accelerate yourself on that journey?
Absolutely, outside of like a very strong SPF. I don't know if this one counts, but your phone. Because Telegram. So I don't know if Telegram is allowed as a desert island
Hmm.
one. So say
Yeah, of course.
no one, um, but you have Telegram. You can go on and join all of these little communities and groups and start talking. Start
Mm,
sharing your thoughts, maybe make some memes, which you can also do on your phone if you're on a desert island. But really start getting out there and building those connections because I have found that some communities more so than others. So it's a little bit of trial and error, but folks like to engage. And if you're trying to get started in Web3 and start building those connections, offer your thoughts. If someone shares something in the Telegram group that you're in that you think is interesting, respond and comment on it. Drop some fun like emojis on the different comments. There's just start really consistently engaging, and that's a great way to build things up a little bit when you don't have
Hmm.
that level of connectivity, when you don't have those connections that you already, have later in your career. So that's a big one, I think. Another one is if you can get your hands on a book that is focused more on broader almost psychology behind marketing and business. And, it's not going to be a perfect application to all things Web3, but I think it's important for us to consistently get out of our own bubbles. And there are things that have already been done and thought through and researched that still work when it comes to Web3. And one of the books I do like is focused on behavioral science in marketing, and it's just really digs into so really that book, I think it's called Behavioral Science and Marketing, or any of those more psychology-based books will get you a lot further than some of these hyper tailored, it's only good for 10 minutes because we're trying to capitalize on this type of NFT, you know, explosion or something like that, because there are certain factors that really drive people. And whether it's like we've talked about, understanding that people want to be part of a community and really what drives that, or understanding some of the interesting biases that people have around, abundance versus scarcity. I think it helps you just understand your fellow humans a little bit better and really understand and reorient yourself consistently towards people time and time again. And those have been really key ones. I think in terms of online courses, I feel like I am on a constant hunt for interesting courses. And I don't currently have a absolute favorite. So I'm actually interested to hear if either of one of you guys have one. I think I've touched on a number of them. I think that there's some really interesting courses for free offered by large, like major universities. There's ones that are affordable from Stanford that focus on blockchain. But when I think about starting a project as a founder, those can be great background and great way to connect with people, but just don't currently have a favorite. Have you guys taken any that you thought were really remarkable?
Me personally,
Yeah.
generally understanding venture finance is probably one of the like any course from any reputable school. Do your 2 or 3 months in that, really going to help you.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
don't do courses. I know everything.
Then
And
you need
I'd
to make
say
some courses.
I'd say
There we go.
from that perspective, I would say
Reddit.
reading. It's not really a course, but it is go back to somewhere like I'm going to be biased, but go onto CryptoSlate, because I genuinely think that the way we report stuff, we only report things that are really important, and maybe Decrypt I'd maybe recommend. But there's so much fluff that other people report on. Like,
Mm.
we don't. I look through the news feeds every day, and there's so many stories that our competitors run that we just won't run because it's just fluff. But if you go back through the last cycle and just read the news feed, the headlines of all the stories for the last from 2020 to now, that would give you so much insight into the space.
Yeah, I think that that's awesome. I think I'd grab both of those if you have a lot of time on a desert island, being able to read through everything, be able to understand venture finance is really essential. And then I would also look at something if you can grab or just something that inspires you that isn't directly necessarily Web3. So if you have a favorite, whether it's a fantasy novel, historical fiction, whether it's an art book, something like that, because I find that sometimes when you're laser focused on a challenge or a problem or building a company, you sometimes lose touch with these other elements outside of that would actually lead to something better. Like I
Mm.
know I come up with my best strategies and campaigns sometimes when I'm out engaging with something else, or even though you can't bring an art museum to a desert island, like a art book or something that just kind of taps into another part of you that you're excited, that gives you that energy to keep going. And I think sometimes we forget about that, honestly. And kind of in line with that is also something healthy. I know that's not directly a startup tool, but I think a lot of times when we're building, building, building and focus, 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 we forget to look after ourselves. And you're not going to build something as great as it could be. You're not going to lead as well as you could if you're running on empty. And there's a
Hmm.
degree of, getting in everything that you possibly can. But I would really emphasize like a little bit of balance. I mean, it's like this is so tired, but the whole little bit of self care, whether it's like healthy eating, don't just try to exist on what was trendy for a while, like Soylent, those drinks. Don't just like eat protein bars. Don't forget to like, you know, shower, do whatever to kind of take care of yourself because I think it's easy to get swept up in the excitement like we were talking about
Hmm.
earlier, but bringing some sort of essential with you on this journey that makes you feel like a person who's taking care of themselves will actually go a long way and beautifully complement all of the kind of harder strategic elements that we talked about and that behavioral science, research and reading those headlines and understanding venture finance. Make sure you're looking after yourself too, basically.
One of my favorite business books is called Rest by Alex Sujong Park, and it's about not working.
Oh, I
And
love that.
yeah, it's one of the most impactful books I've read. And they say, and it brings on all of those ideas, so it's well worth a read as well.
I'll
Yeah,
definitely
touch
check that
grass,
out.
as they say.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I like that a lot. So I think those are my essentials. Are there any essentials that I missed that you guys think you would take with you to the desert island?
Oh, we don't usually get it turned
Yeah, no
around
one's
on
Yeah.
asked.
Well, I need to know if I should be packing something else too. So,
I think, like you said, I think your phone. I think and I think that's so much more prescient than it kind of sounds as well. Because 25 years ago, you wouldn't have thought that would be like just a
Yeah.
phone. Like, oh, so you can call people. Like these mini computers we have are so powerful. Like it shows how much the world has changed. I thought it was a brilliant thing I saw on Reddit the other day. They were talking about like millennials think that big purchases require big screens. So if you're going to buy like flights, it has to be on a desktop. You
I
can't
saw
book
that.
flights on a mobile phone. Well, generations are doing that now, and it's becoming more and more a thing. Like it's not going to be the case for long. So being able to realizing you can do anything from your phone and not limiting yourself by thinking, oh, I need a computer for that.
Yeah, I really like that.
I think for me it'd be the phone's a good one, but for me it's just this isn't something you can bring with you, but it's just reduce your cost as much as possible. So like just ensure that you're living as sustainable a life as possible. So when I was at the beginning of my entrepreneurial journey, I was living in the city in London, moved back home. And that's just part of my story, but I'm not ashamed of it. It's just what happened. When I could just about afford anything, I then moved to Lisbon. It's much cheaper than central London, right? It just is. I
Yeah.
think keeping an eye on lifestyle is important. To your point, Kelsey, around that you still need to have a life, and you can get pretty far in Estonia and Lisbon and countries like this on what you would spend on a night at like one dinner in London. And I think just people need to be conscious of that because a lot of the bigger conferences are in these like city centers, and um, actually a lot of the building doesn't need to happen there.
I think that's something. I think it's amazing to hear Charlie saying that because that's something that Charlie would only want to work when we first met. Like the idea of having a life outside of work wasn't something that you thought was conducive to good work. Like you're
No.
now you're adding, and I was the same. I had my creative director in my company that I founded was the same. He believed in work-life balance. I just wanted to work all the time. Took me 6 years to realize that he was right all along. I met Charlie and the roles were reversed. And now you've seen the light and know that rest is conducive to good work.
Yeah,
It is.
that's great. I'm glad that you've had a transformation, Charlie. I had one too many, nights where I'm just like, oh, let me finish one more thing. Let me finish one more thing. That's 3 or 4 a.m. and you have to wake up in 2 hours. And after a while, I'm just like, you know what? I'm not thinking of any interesting creative concepts on
Mm-hmm.
1 hour of sleep, So
Mm-hmm.
it's a really great, I think, push forward, and we cannot, continue to glorify the working 24/7 because the results just aren't as good.
The
Yeah.
hustle culture. Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, yes, there's the whole mental, like we can argue for the mental health aspect and the work-life balance, but if you want to just look at it from the raw like facts, you will be more productive and you'll be better at your job if you have some space from it.
exactly.
That's not to say
So,
DOS about, like, you do have to GSD, like, you do have to get stuff done.
The
But
old
that's the
Charlie's coming
polite
back a
not
little
really.
bit. Yeah,
More,
get your stuff done, but also sleep.
yeah, there is an element sometimes of JFDI.
so on that note, Kelsey, before we finish off, this is your time to talk about anything you'd like to plug. Where can people find you? Where can they learn more about Shardeum? The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. So I would say Shardeum.org. Check that out. You can see some of the brand stuff that we've been working on, and how we design that. I think to find me, LinkedIn is actually pretty good. Kelsey McGuire. Please send a note. I'm happy to answer people. I'm on Telegram at Hey McGuire, but please include that you heard about me from this particular conversation because there's also a lot of strange inbound messages on Telegram, as well as I'm not on Twitter or X a whole lot, but I occasionally lurk. So that's another place, but you won't see a whole lot of what I have going on there. But mostly Shardeum.org and LinkedIn, and hope to connect with you guys. We're also at a lot of different events. So if you ever see me live, please come up and have a chat. I like talking to you all.
Kelsey, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. I've learned a lot from this. Remember, guys and gals, you can go onto the website and there will be we've got a tool that allows you to look at the transcript and interact with this. Basically, talk as if you were talking with us, with a special tool on the site there. If you go and have a look, don't want to give it away in case we haven't announced it yet. But yeah, go onto the website, check it out, listen back, take notes. Before I got out of marketing, I've been in marketing for 15, 16 years, and I've learned a lot from this podcast episode, Kelsey. So thank you very much. Really opened my eyes to some ideas, which I'll be sharing with people for free because I don't have to pitch anything anymore or sell anything.
Yay!
So thank you again. And Charlie, you've been all right. Till next time, guys. See you in the next one.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
I love you really, Charlie.